Hello and welcome. Today we've got John Dowling, and today we are going to be discussing how the Israel war is a distraction for the new financial system that the White Hats are putting in place. Are they causing delays? I don't know. We're about to find out now from John. Just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Instagram channel at nicholas.veniamin for my from my daily newsreels. John, thank you so much for joining me, sir. How are you and what have you been up to?
Good to see you, Nick. As always, pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on once again. Honestly, I've had all I can handle just trying to keep up with the maelstrom of activity that's going on, as you said, both geopolitically and financially, updating kind of some of my followers and people in my circle, and getting information from the mentors that I've been following for many years. So I've been, dealing with that, and then just working on some personal projects, really pushing hard, making concerted effort to finish this year out on a high note.
Absolutely, very interesting. Okay, so tell me what's going on with this now. We've heard that Israel is last. Okay, the letter, the 17th movement, the 17th letter of the movement Q. We've seen the drops, and it says Israel will be last. Is this a distraction? Are we implementing the financial system? We know that the deep state's power, or the deep state machine, is the Federal Reserve. And once we pull the plug out of the Federal Reserve, they have absolutely no power to control the land of, the world. So where are we with this?
Yeah, it's a it's a great question. It's a very multifaceted situation. So the short answer is yes and yes to your question, but elaborating a little bit more, uh, they are distractions because the more distractions that are done for the financial system to change, because they don't have a war. So let's start at the beginning. The deep state, all wars are bank wars, right? We know that with the Rothschild banking system that we're exiting. Technically, President Trump switched, as you know, from the Federal Reserve. He baked it into the Treasury back in 2020. This is part of a 3-year plan. And Q did say Israel would be last, but Q also said disinformation would be necessary. So critical thinking and a little bit of juxtaposition is really critical, or important in this type of to break down and analyze this. So where we are is pockets of war going on with Israel. You and I were talking offline about sort of the situation, and I'll elaborate on that. It's interesting because you have, Israel came out of nowhere back earlier this month, right on a Saturday is when I heard about it. Most people did. And there's already a natural inclination with most people are sort of preconditioned to be either pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian throughout the world, depending on a number of things. So people are already predisposed to that. But meanwhile, what's interesting is that Prime Minister Soudani of Iraq met with President Putin on October 10th and 11th. And I can assure you, they were not talking about the weather. It was all to do about financial security, oil, and President Putin has 19 billion as a country invested in the nation of Iraq. Here in the U.S., it's over 35 billion, as President Trump had alluded to years past in 2018 in his Fox interview. So these countries have substantial amounts invested, and much to gain from it, right?
Mhm.
But what we're really looking at is we're looking at a defection, because what they want to do is they can't create a war, right? They're not going to get that. So everybody can see out in the open what's going on. But what they can do is create distractions and just print and print and print. And people get up in arms because they think, oh, they're printing money, we're just giving money away, but it's not worth anything because the more you print currency, the less the value becomes. The other complication, Nick, is you start getting into an inflationary situation, which is why we're seeing an uptick in food and gas, and we're going to see a continuation of that in a lot of different sectors. So there's a lot of multiple fronts going on. It's it's intricate and it's complex and it's fascinating all at once, in the aspect of once you understand what the real issue is versus what they want to tell you on the mainstream or even on the independent channels, you really understand it's all about. Q also said follow the money, right?
Mhm.
So the deal with Israel is they couldn't win in Ukraine. They're not going to admit they lost, even though what's interesting is that there's a private shortwave frequency that Russian military has with the Ukrainian soldiers. So if they want to opt out and surrender, they can. And so far, tens of thousands of soldiers have already been surrendering to this point on a daily basis, and that will continue. So it's a default surrender without publicly saying it. So they shift to Israel, which everybody thought would be last, and they did a shift and did that. And that's basically Ukraine 2.0, because I don't know if you're aware of this, Nick. I know you talk to a lot of great people, but Israel is a hotbed for pedophilia and corruption. In Tel Aviv, there's a harbinger of registered sex offenders and money laundering and a whole bunch of other things, because you have multiple cultures within Israel. It's not just pure Jewish, right? And then now what we're looking at is China Taiwan. That's going to be the third iteration. And President Trump has said that's going to happen soon. And I posted some information on one of my channels that it's slated to happen here in the next several days to possibly a week, just depending on when they decide to do it. And the reason that's so critical, and if you notice, just yesterday it came out in the news that Xi and Putin met. And I can almost assure you that's exactly what the substance of that meeting was about, was to set up when they're going to go into China, Taiwan. Mm-hmm. So you have all this happening. You have three big nations, US, China, and Russia, vying for Iraq. It's almost like three suitors for the girl for the prom, and they all need her to go because they need the money, real money, to be able to survive and thrive, because China, Taiwan need Iraq to go for this very short invasion into China, Taiwan. The reason that's significant, Nicholas, is because that's about Vietnam. China has had a stronghold over Vietnam for many years in the CCP. When that breakup occurs, like breaking up a cough or congestion, if you will, when that political financial breakup happens as a result of that invasion, that's going to allow Vietnam to get out of CCP, go into the Republic side, and free up their currency in silver digitally. So you're seeing a simultaneous parallel death of the old system and the birth of the new digital economic system, all simultaneously happening. A lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Now, we done an interview not long ago, probably about a month ago, mm-hmm. about the currency revaluation update, which is the wealth transfer. Okay, right. And I went through the comments, and I was reading all the comments, and I dropped a few questions down to ask you. I thought the viewers would be they'll be very interested that I did that, sure. To see what you would say, of course. I just put it in the wrong order, so I'm just gonna have to pick them out random. I'll do my best.
That's fine.
Now, obviously, the first question is: people are buying. Obviously, they're buying dongs, they're buying Iraqi dinar, and they're buying mm-hmm. the Zimbabwe notes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens? Okay, when they say they revalue their currencies. When we're waiting for this revaluation, what happens if the governments of those currencies that are revaluing, they decide to print new notes and scrap the other notes? Does that mean, would that happen in this scenario?
So it's a great question, actually. There may be some countries who opt to print new currency just for the new system and the new sovereignty that they're going to have, for example, Iraq. But just like here in the US, when we go from the Federal Reserve notes that we're currently carrying, which are already traversing into US Treasury notes, there will be a period of time where they circulate the old currency with the new to get it off the streets. Whether that's, I don't know what that period might be, 6 months, might be a year. I would surmise it will be the same situation with these other foreign currencies, respectively. They're going to have to give time. Like right now, for instance, Nicholas, the citizens of Iraq, to your point, are already meeting with, there's two major banks in Iraq. There's the Rashid Bank and the Rafidian Bank. And it may expand over time, right, as new enterprises open. But those are the two main carriers. And so, or two main banks. And so they're already starting to give almost an 8% interest rate to their citizens to encourage them to open up accounts. Here in America, we haven't seen interest rates like that in, 20, 30 years at least, somewhere in that range. It's been a long time. So they're very highly incentivizing their citizens to do banking because of that. So I think what will happen is that the old notes will be honored if and when new notes are printed, depending on the country you're dealing with. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. Banks are highly incentivized to work with the citizens because they're going to need, their business, quite frankly. And you're also going to have a whole tranche of new wealth out there. that's why a lot of these banks, I can't speak to the banks overseas, but here in America, there's been a big concerted effort, as we've discussed, to traverse the business climate of banks from, commercial retail to wealth management. So I would have to make a reasonable suspicion or assumption that that's what's going to happen overseas as well, particularly in Europe, right? For you guys over there in London, since you're the banking epicenter. So they'll definitely honor the old notes as they transition.
Sure. Now, from my understanding, I think, in my opinion, from my research, and please let me know if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong, is that I think the white hats are taking over the deep state banks, and they're going to be sort of implementing the new system with those banks and then fade the banks out because we're technologically evolving as well. And people think that's bad. It's deep state. I think it's not bad. I think it all depends who's controlling it. If they're
Mhm.
controlling it for good, that's good. If they're controlling it to control you, then it's bad. So for me, the technology is not bad. Now, if it's the case they're going to use it for good, and we're moving into this quantum, quantum era, if you
Mhm.
like, um, how are we going to be paid out the currencies once we exchange them? Are they going to be through, you know, the banks, or is it going to be physical? Is it going to be digital?
Yeah. So, okay. So that's, to me, in my mind, Nicholas, that's two questions. It's like a question in two parts, right? The way my brain processes that. You're not wrong. I would just elaborate a little bit further to say that uh, they are going to the Patriots are definitely infiltrating the banks in a good way. And the way that you know that, again, if you look on the USDebtClock.org, which
Mhm.
I post frequently, you can see that they're putting messages in there, biblical messages. There was one point on a screen where there were no numbers whatsoever. So it's being shifted constantly throughout, this cycle process. And that hadn't happened before. You also notice on the left, it used to say Federal Reserve notes, now says US notes, US dollars. So the transition has already, been in play for a while, to your point about that internal shift. But I've always talked with you candidly, Nicholas, both on and off camera, and I'll say it to your viewers as well, that the main goal for your folks should be to become your own central bank. Use the banks as a stepping off platform. In other words, work with them. Don't fight them. They're not saints, but don't fight them right now because they're still the default until we shift. So work with them, get yourself into, precious metals, land, uh, growing your own food, weapons. That's my personal preference. Some people don't, some people do, but it's as a US American, that's your constitutional right. You should certainly, in my humble opinion, take advantage of that. But you want to be in physical assets that you control, that you can touch, right? As opposed to paper certificates for gold or silver, as an example. Transitioning from that point to your other question, they're going to honor whatever paper currency you have. It's going to be converted in digital form. And the
Sure.
way we know that is because the blockchain with the QFS you're alluding to is the centerpiece for the whole thing. I'm glad you asked that question, Nicholas, because one of the things I wanted to touch base with you on, for you and your viewers, is that sometime around November, we believe, give or take before Thanksgiving, could be, a week, 10 days on the outside. The blockchain and the QFS, the ISO 20022, we've always talked about affectionately, is going to be cemented in place. That becomes the baseline foundation for all the financial systems, including the currencies, to be liquid and do so in digital form. And then that could bring up another question that I always get, if you don't mind me bringing it
Oh,
up, which is
please.
one question I always get from people is, and I've seen it in your comments in the past, is should I have a trust? Should I not have a trust? It's not damning if you don't have a trust. However, I recommend you have a trust because I have one. I have what's called a living non-irrevocable express trust, but it's a common law trust. It's not a statutory law trust. And what that simply means is traditional trusts operate in Uniform Commercial Code commerce under the US corporation. Common law trusts operate under the Constitution. You have more freedom, you have more anonymity, you don't have to disclose the assets. You can do subcategories. You could do your private trust and have a subtrust for the dinar, a subtrust for the dong, a subtrust for your precious metals, like file folders that
Mhm.
you have in your computer that separate line item assets. you could do that same exact thing with this type of trust. And it's a lot less oversight from the IRS because you're not on the corporation system, you're on the constitutional common law system. It's a big delineation that's happened. So that is something I highly recommend to all the people I deal with directly.
And how would people find out when the RV happens, when the currency revaluation actually happens?
It's a great question. Thank you for that. It's actually a lot of people, it's analysis paralysis. You know, they're getting information from all angles. It's a hard time to discern what's real and what's not real. And I've talked with you before in the past about, trusting your instincts and using discernment. Where you feel peace and calm and certainty, there's God. When you feel angst and confusion and uncertainty and anxiety, that's usually the enemy. So that's usually a good barometer. But the simplest way to know is just to go on the CBI.gov, Central Bank of Iraq.gov website. That's their central bank. When the rate changes, an announcement will be made globally, and you can just go on that website and it will post it, and you'll know.
Now, the other question from one of the viewers was, is there a specific amount of currency that they need to have, at least?
No,
So they
it
can.
doesn't matter if you have one note or scores. I mean, there's people with shoe boxes of dinar for the last 20 years. There's people who only have one note. It doesn't, there's no minimum quota threashhold, if that's what you're asking.
Now, a very, very important question that I must ask. Okay.
Sure.
Now, I mean, I've had this question, and I will tell you what I answered them. All right. And you tell me what you think. So someone said to me, what if I don't have any, what if I don't have a receipt that I bought these currencies? Because you can buy currencies from the bank that give you a receipt and you keep it. Now, my answer was, well, you don't need a receipt to exchange them, because you could just say that you've come back from holiday, from vacation, and this is my change. Because we naturally don't do that when we go to exchange them back to the currencies that we reside in. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you're correct. As long as the currency is legitimate and not black market, like, the people that you deal with, you can get an e-receipt, and that's just as good as a physical receipt. They'll honor that. It's not required, but if it's all about your personal preference. Me personally, I like to have the currency with a certification, COA, certification of authenticity, and a receipt. Some people like one, they like the other. Some people like both. But from a exchange standpoint, you don't necessarily need the receipt. I recommend it, but it's what the bank's mentality they're concerned about is it legitimate? They're going to run it through what's called a Delaware machine. It's a French watermark authentication machine, much like you would see in the banks where if you took out $1,000, they put it in and it quick counts it. It's like that, but it has UV ultraviolet lighting in it, and it checks the watermarks, it checks the security features to make sure it's legitimate. As long as you have legitimate currency at the end of the day, that's their primary concern. And if you're an account holder with that bank, all the better.
Absolutely. And what if some of the notes are not circulated? Does it matter?
No, there was a time, that's a good question. I get that a lot. There was a time where we opined that maybe, 7, 8 years ago, it was more advantageous to get, uncirculated versus circulated, but it doesn't matter anymore. It goes back to the same answer as long as it's legitimate.
Sure. And, what the most biggest and, questions that I get very frequently is, when do you think the currency revaluation is happening? And I bet it's like literally it's happening right now, right? I think.
So, when you and I did our show with Mr. T back in January, you were very passionately adamant about saying, it's happening this year. And I said yes, and I'm still maintaining that. And I'll tell you why for your viewers, to give them some meat on the bone. So in order to answer that question, let's establish what we do know, right? It came out about a week ago, give or take, that Iraq's central bank openly said to their public and to the world, as of January 1st, 2024, we are not accepting any dollars in or out of country. So if you're a businessman and you go to Iraq frequently, or you're a dual citizen or something, right now you could put in $500 and leave and get $500. You can do that until January 31st of this year. After the first, you cannot. So that's your back wall. So plausibly, it's reasonable to believe that it has to happen between now and that point. We are definitely in that window right now.
Interesting. Well, John Dowling, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor to have you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity for this interview again, and an opportunity to share something with your viewers. The main thing I would want your people to know is don't try to get caught up on having all the answers and trying to figure all the minutia of details. You're going to drive yourself crazy, and do your best to not live in fear and worry about this. This is God's blessing. He wants to bless his people, and he's going to bless the people that he trusts, that are going to do the right things, that are going to steward it, help the poor, help the lonely. Some people call it humanitarian projects, some people call it kingdom. That's semantics, but there's a lot of good-hearted people out there who want to make a concerted effort to make a difference. Focus on that. Focus on what you're going to do when the money comes, instead of trying not to overly obsess about when. Just live your life, take it day by day, let God surprise you. And I think you'll discover that's a much better way to go in your day-to-day process, and that you're going to be very pleasantly surprised with the end results, both timing and financially, monetarily.
Absolutely. And for those asking, I will be leaving the link below so you can get those currencies as well. The link will be below so you can get them. John, thank you so much. And we'll speak again very soon. You take care and God bless you. Bye bye.
You as well. God bless.